The only voice in this game that isn't a part of the soundtrack is the narrator, and the person providing the narration is Queen Latifah. That simple fact alone says a lot about the priorities of the game. Sayonara Wild Hearts is a game out now on Switch, PS4, and Apple Arcade from developer Simogo and publisher Annapurna Interactive. It is, in the words of the marketing material itself, a playable music video, and the accompanying album of music from the game that's available now on Apple Music, Spotify, and digital music stores is appropriately getting as much attention as the game itself. In terms of mechanics, Sayonara Wild Hearts is best described as an action arcade rhythm game. That's a bit of a mishmash of words, but in practical terms, what you'll be doing is playing a sort of hybrid between a smartphone runner like Temple Run and an arcade cabinet shooter like Galaga, which will occasionally throw timing-based elements at you that feel less like Guitar Hero and more like DDR due to the sense of action accompanying everything on the screen. The game levels are built like an arcade game as well, with an emphasis on repetition and checkpoints that should have you progressing pretty consistently provided you aren't prone to rapid fits of frustration. The game isn't difficult, per se, as is evidenced by the fact that even I was able to beat the main story mode in just a couple of hours. If you screw up less than I did, you could conceivably beat it in as little as 1 hour, because I believe that's as long as the soundtrack is, and absolutely everything in this game is accompanied by music. This is probably a good thing overall, because the mechanics would get exceptionally tedious over an extended campaign. They're fun, don't get me wrong, but there isn't a ton of variety. The main source of variety is the 5 different worlds where you put those mechanics to work. The visual design serves to add some spice to the sequence of basic top-down or side-to-side character control punctuated with timing-based button presses by subtly tweaking the perceived results of your movement and rhythmic responses. The game mechanics remain constant, but the shifting visual cues and outputs keep them feeling fresh for the duration of the game. Speaking of visuals, I've never dropped acid personally, but if you trust random people on the internet to know what they're talking about, this is evidently not a bad analog for a fairly mild acid trip. Personally, I think it looks great, but I'd love to get some feedback from somebody playing it on a TV instead of a phone or Switch screen to see if it still looks good in large format, or if it's actually a bit more seizure-inducing when you blow it up to 60 inches on the diagonal. So, alright then, the game is simple but entertaining, looks unique, and doesn't overstay its welcome. But it's probably worth mentioning that if you hate electronic pop music, these are not the droids you're looking for. It's true that judging a game based primarily on its music usually isn't a great idea, but where rhythm action is concerned, we make an exception. Before you buy this game, I would strongly recommend you listen to a few tracks on Spotify or something and figure out if this is something you want to listen to. Because if it's not, no amount of pretty visuals or satisfying arcade gameplay will convince you that the game is good. Okay, so you like the arcade rhythm action, you think the visuals look cool, and you appreciate the music. So what is the game really about? It's obviously not purely dedicated to the arcade rhythm action, because unlike something like Beat Saber, there's no real way for the community to directly interact with each other through the game. No leaderboards, no community-created levels, nothing like that. It's purely a single-player experience, which means there must be quite a bit of emphasis on the story, right? Sure, tons of emphasis, for like one person, somewhere. Don't get me wrong, there's nothing about the quote-unquote story of Sayonara Wild Hearts that bothers me or anything like that, but the underlying meaning of the story also doesn't really connect with me, like, at all. It's pretty clearly supposed to be about heartbreak, and I've definitely experienced some heartbreak in my life, but my perception is that overall it's just very tightly scoped, and probably means the world to whoever it's sort of based on. And shoot, it'll probably mean the world to some subset of players who just so happen to connect with it just right, but consider yourself warned. I'd say there's at least a 50% chance that it won't make much sense at all. But I'm gonna just go with, the story isn't the reason you should play this game. There are plenty of other reasons to do so, however, so basically if you've seen the trailers, or you're watching the gameplay here and you're thinking, hey, that looks pretty good, and you've got a Switch, PS4, or iPhone, and at least some interest in Apple Arcade, I would say you should definitely give Sayonara Wild Hearts a play. It's a solid indie game with a lot of charm and personality you won't find elsewhere. Also, Queen Latifah is the narrator. Not sure if I've mentioned that yet.